Hello, and welcome back to episode 4 of the Life and Mission of St. Mary Euphrasia. I'm so excited to continue this journey with you today as we explore Mary Euphrasia's early days as a sister of Our Lady of Charity. In our last episode, we learned of the struggles and sorrows that Rose Virginie experienced as a teenager. We saw the breakup of her family, the death of her parents, and the hard times she faced at Madame Chaubelet's boarding school. So how have your reflections been going? Are you finding something in common with Rose?
One of the things that has really struck me from the last episode is how struggle can help shape us for the good. Who knows if Rose would have been so passionate about making a difference in the world later on if she had not experienced so much sorrow and mistreatment.
Yeah, I agree. I find that really remarkable. It seems that when we can look at a trial as an opportunity for growth and something better, then great things can happen and our character is shaped for the better. It's not an easy path. And since we have all had our own challenges in life, we know that it would have been understandable if Rose had turned inward to care for herself. But she didn't. She turned outward to others. Why?
I suppose we can guess that the early modeling of her parents helped. They were in a terrible situation when they came to Normandier, but they made the best of it and even found the energy and love to help others. Rose probably had good mental health from early childhood, and the positive influences of Pauline de Lignac seemed to help, and she had the strength that she found in her faith in God. Speaking of that, you mentioned at the end of the last episode that Rose and Pauline de Lignac had a shared interest in religious life.
That's true. The call to religious life is something that further bonded the two friends. Ultimately, Pauline decided to become an Ursuline sister. She encouraged Rose to join with her, but Rose felt that she had a different calling, but they remained friends into adulthood. As I mentioned in the last episode, not too far from the boarding school was a convent run by the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity. It was called the Refuge of St. Gadian. At the beginning of the 1800s, just after the French Revolution, the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity lived there, along with the women and girls that were entrusted to their care. The refuge was just across the street from the boarding school, so when Rose asked about it, she was told that that's where the bad girls lived. Well, of course, they weren't bad girls. At the time, women needed to have a man to protect and provide for them. And if they didn't, they would often have to turn to prostitution or stealing to take care of their kids. The bad girls either didn't have parents or were forced to make some very difficult decisions. Rose understood about suffering and loss, and she knew that they were not bad girls, but girls who needed love, understanding, and help. And she felt a very strong desire to join these sisters.
She must have joined right away. She was so unhappy in school.
Well, I'm sure she couldn't wait to get started on her new life. However, as a young woman, she had to get the permission of her guardian to be able to enter the convent. Remember, her guardian was her brother-in-law, and he did not want Rose entering this order. He thought that it would be all right if she entered a respectable order, one that took care of the sick or educated young women from high society, but not Our Lady of Charity. He told her no.
What was Our Lady of Charity like?
Well, Our Lady of Charity was officially recognized in 1666. It was founded by a man named St. John Eudes for the purpose of helping women get off the street and reintegrate into society. The first house was in Caen, France. The sisters wore a white habit, blue cord around their waists, and a silver heart pendant.
I remember in the introduction video, you said how much St. Mary Euphrasia liked to read St. John Eudes' books and the history of his life.
Yes. So John Eudes was born in Rye, France in 1601. We won't get too much into his story today, but his life was equally as fascinating. He was a priest and a traveling preacher, and he recognized the plight of women during his time, and he wanted to do something for them. He asked his cousin, Madame Laney, to take in a few women and teach them some skills, keep them safe, and get them back into society. Well, as you can imagine, it was difficult work. So one day, Madame Lamy saw John Eudes walking down the street with a couple of his friends, and she stuck her head out the window and she yelled at him. And she said, "Where are you going, Father Eudes? To church to pray to the statues? And you'll think quite well of yourself, right? Well, that's not where the query lies. Why don't you do something for these girls and women who are perishing for want of assistance?" Well, that was a real wake-up call for John Eudes. As a result, he founded the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity of the Refuge in 1641 and gave them the task of taking these disempowered women in, clothing them, feeding them, and showing them God's love. And, as I said, it was officially recognized by Rome in 1666. In founding this new order of religious women, St. John Eudes understood the difficulty of the work. And so in addition to the 3 normal vows that sisters take, he gave the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity a 4th vow, and it was called Zeal for the Salvation of Souls. Today we just call it zeal, and you can think about zeal as being love in action. So back to Rose Virginie now. She was very drawn to this idea of zeal and knew that she had found a place to live out her calling, which matched so well with her own personal mission for her life. She wanted to make it possible for those who could not give and receive love to be able to be healed in mind, body, and spirit. She also wanted it to be possible for them to reconcile and reconnect with others, themselves, and God. That was what she wanted her life's work to be.
But you said her guardian said no.
He did say no, several times, in fact. Madame Chobalet also tried to convince her to join a different order. But as we have learned about Rose, she was very persistent and driven by her calling. She persevered in her desire to enter Our Lady of Charity. Eventually, her guardian relented and said that she could join, but that she would have to wait until she was 21 years old.
I'm sure she was thrilled to start her new life. And that's when she became St. Mary Euphrasia?
Yeah, so it was traditional then that upon making vows and becoming a sister, a woman would receive a new name. The first name, Mary, is after Jesus' mother, and the second name was a saint's name. And this is a way of letting go of their worldly identity and also of taking on a spiritual role model. Rose loved St. Teresa of Avila. You can see this if you read her conferences, where there are frequent references to St. Teresa's writings. She asked to be named Sister Teresa, but she was told to choose another one. St. Teresa was very popular at the time, and a name like that was one that a superior should give to someone, not one that a person should ask for. So she then chose a very obscure saint, St. Euphrasia, who was an Egyptian princess who had died in the year 410. And that is how we have come to know Rose Virginie as St. Mary Euphrasia. It's interesting, though, to learn that St. Euphrasia was somebody that St. Teresa also admired very deeply. So, in spite of not being able to take the name Teresa, Mary Euphrasia still kept a connection to her.
What do we know about Mary Euphrasia's time as a young sister?
She was a gifted and talented young person. She built relationships easily with the older sisters. All of the sisters were significantly older, and there were few, if any, peers in the house where she entered. She was a delightful young sister among many elderly sisters who had suffered extensively during the persecutions of the Revolution. I'm sure she was a breath of fresh air. Her early years there would have centered on shared prayer, community life, and work with the girls in their care. Because she had a bright mind, her superior encouraged her to study the Bible, which was unusual for women at the time. She also loved to read about the history of the congregation and the writings of St. John Eudes. Most likely, she also spent time sweeping in the chapel, cleaning and cooking. Most novices also sewed, but Mary Euphrasia had no talent for that, so she didn't have to. As a young novice, she first encountered working with the girls, and she had a gift for this work. From her experience at the boarding school and her studies, she developed her philosophy in dealing with the girls that were to come into her care. She was a very competent group worker, and had an incredible understanding of troubled teens and women and their need for love and respect. She tells the story of being with the girls one day when they were upset and the group seemed like it was going to go in 1,000 directions on her and that there would be problems, and how she held them together by spotting a grasshopper in the yard and brought it to them so they could all gather around and name the grasshopper and care for him, and the day was saved, thus showing her sensitivity to group dynamics, her responsiveness, and resourcefulness.
It sounds like she was perfect for Our Lady of Charity. What an amazing set of talents.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting then that she said of herself towards the end of her life, "I had no outward gifts or talents. I only loved, and I loved with all the strength of my soul." In her work with the girls, she encountered many whose lives changed, and they decided they wanted to stay with the sisters. However, at that time, there was no way for them to do that. If girls or women had come from a rougher past, they were not allowed to be sisters, even if they wanted to. I think that must have bothered Mary Euphrasia. So some years passed with her working in the group and learning about community life as a sister of Our Lady of Charity. In 1825, when she was only 29, she was unanimously elected superior of her house in Tours. And this was quite remarkable because normally somebody had to be 40 before they were elected. The house in Tours had to get special permission from Rome to make that happen. So that should tell us just how gifted she was and how highly her sisters thought of her. This was a pivotal point in Mary Euphrasia's life. She was placed in a position of leadership in spite of her young age. She had fears and anxieties, and yet she maintained confidence in her calling from God. She believed in the power and the practice of prayer in her life and work. Remember the girls I mentioned a minute ago who wanted to join the sisters but were unable? Well, Mary Euphrasia's first official act as superior was to found a new community devoted to prayer called the Magdalens. And this is who we now know as the Contemplative Sisters. They were founded specifically to pray for the work. And since this was a new branch of sisters, the girls who had been in the program were allowed to join. So that brings us to the end of this episode. We have seen the influence her parents had on her and the early example she had of people who turn outward to comfort others. We have seen her gifts at work and her personal calling to help those most in need. And we are beginning to see the development of her as a leader. So we're going to give you some time now to reflect upon your own calling to be a good shepherd. Take some time with the reflection questions to journal and maybe to share your answers with a group. In our next episode, we'll hear of Mary Euphrasia's split with Our Lady of Charity, the development of the Generalate, and the expansion of the mission to the world. See you then.